Hello everyone, welcome back to the College Application Hub. My name is Good, and today I'm going to be talking about the interview process. Now, to clarify, the interview process is going to probably take multiple videos since today I'm just going to be talking about the one-on-one interview that's really common in BSMDs, but also the interview type for regular schools. So this is the one you're going to definitely see during your application season. So this is and probably the most important type. But for those of you who are applying to BSMD, there are going to be other videos that are going to be really helpful for you, such as why medicine essay and interview, the MMI interview format, and there's going to be also a video discussing some other formats that you might see. But today we're going to be focusing on the one-on-one interview. So uh, I'm sure that going into having read about interviews and having talked to your guidance counselor, etc., you have heard some pointers. Dress professionally. Suits, of course. Be courteous, be on time, ask questions, and I think that's the most important point that they have made. You should be prepared with some questions of your own about the school to show that you're dedicated to the school, that you have done your research. Those are all good pointers, but they're not enough to assure your success. And from my experience, I you know the, first of all, the goal. What is the goal? The goal is to sell yourself, to make yourself appealing, right? And from what I found, there is the quickest, the safest way to do it. I think is to follow a 4 to 5 step process. So the first is make sure that you include your resume. Your resume should always by your side, and you should always you should know your resume from front to back. There should be no issues with remembering anything from your resume. That is who you are to the colleges, right? Um, but the thing is, when you're answering these questions, you should base them from your resume, and you should relate to them to the future. What you want to accomplish, or why do you want to go to this school. They can all be tied back to your resume. Why do you want to go to a particular major? So, of course, there are going to be instances where it's going to be harder to connect to a resume, such as what's your favorite movie. But in general, your resume should always be at the back of your mind, and you should always try to use it in a question, because it first tells the interviewer about what you did, but it also allows you to give a good narration, which is the second point. Always create a narrative, a story about the question that you're asked. Don't just say my favorite activity was this because it was really fun, and yeah, and it was like really interesting, and I helped a lot of people. That's not an interesting answer. That's not going to stick with the people. You're trying to make sure that out of the however many applicants there are, yours is the one that sticks in the mind of the interviewers. So, what you need to do is, instead of giving that answer, create a story that first relates to your resume, right? That talks about your resume experience, why you started doing that activity, what that activity meant to you, and then talk about how you're going to pursue that activity in the future, for example. Or if you're talking about a specific scenario or like a specific event that happened, talk about the event, and talk about the individuals that concerning that event, and kind of go into detail. Detail makes perfect, because when you tell details and it's an interesting story, it's going to stick with your interviewers. The third thing is, and I mentioned this just now, make sure in your stories you kind of discuss, like, if you're including, let's say, okay, let's say you're talking about a time where you face some obstacles in your group activity, right? In that story, make sure that you include the perspectives of different people involved. Now, obviously, this is not going to apply to every single question, but then again, you should know which question this applies to. It applies to questions where your teamwork is involved, where you're dealing with other people, or where you're in a volunteering situation, and there is someone you're trying to help, or you're working at your job and there's a customer. So having empathy and seeing issues from the eyes of others is a really crucial issue that shows your mature skills. um, it's also important to make sure that if you're asked and you tell something negative about yourself, like a weakness of yours, you also spin that in a positive direction to make sure that even your negative answer, quote unquote, is a check in your positives. So, the best way to do that is how you overcame that obstacle. There's also like a last pointer. It is like if you're discussing something like a film or a movie, try to make a connection with the interviewer. Like what I mean by that is like don't like try to guesstimate what their favorite book would be. No, you should have a favorite book of your own, for example, or favorite movie of your own. But try to have a stimulating intellectual conversation rather than just saying, this was a good book. Go into detail, and have that stimulating conversation and show that you're an intellectual. And I think that overall, the main message, the main summary is don't tell, but show. Okay, don't just tell them, this was a fun activity. This was like a difficult time of my life. This was a obstacle that I faced. Narrate them the story. Show them why it was hard for you, why you like this activity. Because when you show them, it sticks with them. So let's get into some specific questions, shall we? So the one question that you are 99% going to see is the why this school question. And the why this school question is also a very common essay question. Most of the big schools have an essay dedicated to why do you want to go to this school. And it's very natural considering a lot of people apply to schools just because they have the space and the name of the school is well known. They don't want kids like that. They're investing in you. They want to make sure that when you get in, you accept that spot. And you need to convince them of that. So when you're talking about why this school, you need to, you can't just be like, okay, because like your football team has some good games and like your school has some cool traditions and like your yard is very big. No, that's a very lame answer, and that's not going to get anywhere because that just shows that you have done zero research about the school, and you don't know anything about the school, and you're not a worthy applicant. What is a good answer is relating it to your resume, right? You choose a particular activity. Let's say in my case, we choose my work my work with endometriosis, right? I can talk about first like a relative of mine suffered from endometriosis, and I saw their struggle. And these are all true, by the way. Don't I think this goes without saying. Don't make up anything. Just like always tell the truth. People can tell when you're lying. Talk about so I would have talked about, for example, my the struggle of my relative with endometriosis and how much she suffered, and then I would talk about that sparked an interest in me to both raise awareness and learn more about the disease itself. So I shadowed a surgeon who worked on endometriosis. I started an awareness campaign in my school, and then talk talk about the school like you're applying. A lot of schools have a clinic, for example, dedicated to endometriosis and women's health, right? So you talk about that, and you talk about like a research opportunity, like a specific researcher who works on endometriosis, or like a research program that would allow you to pair up with someone that would be knowledgeable about endometriosis or anything like that. And you have to do research, and you should do the same research for this the why this school essay, right? So use the information from your widest school, but also the other information that you looked up as well when you were doing your research to relate it back to your resume. And when you're relating back to your resume, tell a story, right? And then relate it to, I did this activity because of etc etc, right? Because in my case I had a relative, and then I also wanted to raise awareness. And then once I got into it, I saw how fulfilling it was and how widespread of a condition it is, and there's not enough recognition of it. And then say that in your college I want to pursue this more because of the research opportunities that are involved, because of the volunteering opportunities that are involved, and for this reason this college is perfect for me. So this is how you should structure why this school essay. Along similar lines is the and you're probably going to see this, and they're going to directly ask you what was your most meaningful activity, or what's like your most important activity. And the thing is, a lot of time you are going to have multiple ones on your mind. Choose one, and don't let it be the one you just did for why this school. You can do something else, but you can for in my case I would talk about, for example, my work with Syrian refugees, right? The Syrian I organized again, resume relates to resume. I'm going to really narrate a story right now. uh also going back, I know that I didn't address like make a connection with interviewer, make everything positive, and examine the point of view of other people. Those are not always going to apply, but there's specific circumstances that those are going to apply, and I'm going to come to those, so don't worry about those. But in this case, I'm going to talk about my work with Syrian refugees. So when talking with Syrian refugees, I come from Turkey, a country that had a lot of refugees during the refugee crisis, and I saw their misery in the border towns, and the towns close to the Aegean Sea. I saw how stores piled life vests that did not have the proper flotation material. So um, if they when the refugees bought it with a shred of hope of crossing to the Greek islands, a lot of times when the boat flipped, they would drown. They would not be able to survive. And then I would talk about how I felt obligated to help them, and I had to go organize a donation drive with the companies and assure them that I would document every stage of the process. Then I organized a donation drive with the logistics companies and a organization. So you tell them of your process and you relate it back to your resume, and then you tell them about how this made you feel, because feelings are important in this case. In my case, it was a wonderful experience being able to give these refugees a shred of hope amidst their troubling times, amidst their dark times, and it was a wonderful experience that I very rarely felt. You only get that from doing something of similar humanitarian cause. And then you relate it, even when it's what was your most meaningful activity, I would recommend that you relate it to the school that you're applying to, because the thing is, you want to show again why this school is going to provide you with the opportunities. Why, sure, you did that activity, but if you're not going to do it in college, was it really that meaningful? Well, if it's meaningful, I want to pursue it in college, right? I want to improve my work, and I want to pursue it further on. So you give specific examples, specific clubs, specific organizations, specific people, specific classes that would allow you to expand your work with that specific activity and pursue it further. So those are two big essays that you're going to see. Another thing that you're going to see from your resume, and this is going to be much more direct, so you don't really get much control over this, and this doesn't happen as often, but what was your experience with this? Sometimes they do see your resume, sometimes they don't. It really depends on the school. What was your experience with a particular activity, right? they're going to directly ask you, research or volunteering or sometimes just like a sport. But the key here is, you're not going to be able to utilize your resume because you're not choosing the activity. They chose the activity for you. But you still have to narrate. I think that's the most important thing. Because when you narrate, even if it's an athletic thing, you talk about the specific meets you went to, you talk about your camaraderie. If you're talking about your research, for example, you talk about the impact, why you went into that research, how impactful that research was. If you're talking about volunteering, you talk about, how that volunteering made you felt. Again, the impact of it, this, what you did. I'm just going to briefly talk about, what I did, for example, for swimming, right? I really enjoy swimming because of the camaraderie involved. So I would, for example, talk about specific, like a specific meet and afterwards how like friendships developed after that meet. Or, again, it really depends on what event they ask you about, but you have to adapt yourself and you really have to narrate about because the thing is, any activity that you put on your resume, you're telling colleges that is an important activity. So if the activity you put on there is not important, that shouldn't be on there in the first place. So you need to make sure that when you're talking about this, you need to make sure that everything you put on there is important, and then so that you can accurately talk about it and you can elaborate on it and create a story on it. So that is three of the questions done that you're likely to see. Uh, all right, so then we come to the part that involves more of your leadership skills, the part that involves your understanding of others, and the parts where you might occasionally have to spin things in a positive direction. And the part that you definitely have to spin in a positive direction is the question, what is your biggest weakness? Because sometimes I think one or two schools actually did explicitly ask me how'd you overcome it, but implicitly all of them are asking what is your weakness and how would you overcome it. It's not like just what is your weakness. You have to identify the problem and you have to solve the problem. So one thing would be, for example, let's see. Okay, so this is a problem that many of you face, and it's procrastination, right? Procrastination is normal. A lot of us are lazy, but that's not really acceptable, and that's a problem. That's a good problem to have. It doesn't really indicate anything serious, but you can't really have that going forward. You are going to be a college student. You're going to get a job, so you need to make sure that you're on top of your work. So you identify the problem that you are lazy, that you procrastinate, but then you don't just say, yeah, that's still a big problem of mine. No, you talk about how you resolve that problem. Because if you are interviewing at that school, you should have resolved your problem, and then you should be the model applicant. So, you talk about, yes, I don't know, addicted to video games, right? You talk about that. Not in my case, but like I'm just saying in general, or addicted to social media or anything. You identify the reason for your procrastination. Not just that you procrastinate, but why do you procrastinate? So that shows that you're able to analyze yourself and find the problem. And then you talk about, okay, so I took these measures such as restricting how, I said like blocking the amount of time I could spend on my computer, setting alarms, and having reminders, or creating a schedule where I would work like I would reward myself with 15 minutes of gaming for every hour of work that I did, or something like that. Like it doesn't. You just have to come up with a system to show that you overcame that problem. So that's putting the positive spin on it. Because the thing is, none of us are perfect, right? If you just said I have no problems, that that shows you're lying, because all of us have problems. The issue is how do you go about solving that problem? And if you're able to, because all of us are going to encounter problems, and the college are looking for people who are not just good at identifying the problem, but also good at approaching the problem, about solving the problem. So that's something you should you should think about. So another thing that might be asked of you is, if you were dealing with a problem, how would you approach it? And again, this shows the importance of dealing with problems. So this is like a hypothetical. It's not necessarily asking like what the specific problem is, but just like you're facing any problem. What is your general process about going about solving it? And I think there's two important components. First, don't overestimate yourself. Don't be afraid to say, okay, I would first, reach out to others, who might be able to help me, friends, family, guidance counselor, anyone. Because the thing is, when others approach it from an outside perspective, they're able to better analyze the problem and they're able to give you advice that you wouldn't have thought of. But you also, that's this is perfectly fine to say, but you should also add about what you would individually do, right? And in my case, I mentioned a lot. I would try to take myself out of the problem. I would try to think like the other individuals, because I do get clouded when I am in the middle of a problem, and I'm just like, I feel stressed, and I'm not able to think correctly. Then I kind of take like a breather, like a 5 minute breather, just like, and think, okay, we have encountered bigger problems before, and you always gotten stressed about this, but every time it turned out that you kind of had a solution for it. I mean, even though it did not maybe turn out perfect, it turned out well enough. So you need to risk assessment, right? You just have to you need to show how that you wouldn't freak out, and that even if you were freaking out, you would get it under control. That shows your internal mechanism. So, um, and these are all again kind of putting a positive spin. Even if you might have the character flaw of freaking out, it shows that you're able to you at least are aware of the problem and can do have a method of overcoming it. There's also like, if you might just go another way, since like they're not really specifying the problem, you can actually talk about like a problem in a group setting. So like a group project, this didn't really happen in my case, but this is again because they don't really specify what the problem is. So you can elaborate. You can give both of these answers at the same time. It just depends on how much time you have. But if you give this example, like if you just talk about, let's say there's a group project and there's a person who's not cooperating properly, then you talk to them about, if is there something going on, um, and you hear their side as well as your other group mates' side about, why their side is right. And the thing is, this shows your leadership as well, which is actually the next question. So I'm going to elaborate on that. But the next question is actually very related. What is the time you had to make a decision as a leader, right? So uh, going off that group activity, right? My answer to this was, I had a group project, I think like in eighth grade or something, and in when we were doing this group activity, there was a student who was really eager to join, but when the student joined, like after like less than a week, he just kind of started not showing up, not doing any of his parts, and a lot of the other students were like, just in favor of kicking him out. And I got their frustration, because we were carrying that student, and why should he get the glory? But the thing is, I also wanted to hear his side of the story. So, I approached him and we talked privately about, I said, is there something going on that I can help you with? So that, I can also like make sure that I understand the problem correctly. And, he told me that he had some family issues going on. So, I talked with the others, of course, with his permission. And, we arranged a situation where we would handle some of his workload till he had some he could deal with his issues. But I also, and he turned out to be one of the best members of the group. But another important thing is, when talking with him, I also said, I'm here if you need help. I am able, I can offer you my help. But you should also go talk with a guidance counselor. So that also shows that you, as a leader, you're not just focused on the task at hand, but that you're focused on the well-being of your members. So if you're, the question of like if you're dealing with a problem, how would you approach it? And what is a time when you had to make a difficult decision as a leader? Uh, are very interrelated because in many times you should or you can talk about your group mates, and this shows that you are able to use empathy to understand the position of others, and that you're concerned with the well-being of others, not just the task at hand. So it shows a mature character on your part, as well as a person who has good teamwork skills, which is crucial for college applications. Um, so the last two questions that I'm going to talk about are usually rare. They have come up before, but it's not as big a role as the other questions. So the first one is why this specific major, and the reason that this doesn't really come up is like a lot of people change their majors. A lot of because people know like like they know that a lot of people go through a lot of different majors, so it's not really set in stone. This being said, for those of you who are going to BSMD, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, why medicine is a completely different beast, and for those of you who are doing BSMD, why medicine will definitely come up in one shape or form. So don't confuse why this major with why medicine. So why medicine is a completely separate topic of its own. Today we're just discussing why this specific major. I did biomedical engineering, so I was able to again relate to my resume. I talked about my shadowing experiences as in the surgery room, especially in the urology department. I talked about, you know, my amazement at learning about the different technologies that are involved in the surgical process, and how these devices and materials fascinated me, and that since I have a passion for helping others and also for medicine and also for science, it seemed like a perfect combination of both, so that I can still be connected with medicine, since I eventually want to become a doctor, but also be connected with the technological side of medicine, because I believe still that if you are going to medicine, that it's very important. It's very good to have an engineering background, simply because you approach problems in a different manner, and you also have a good familiarity with the technological processes of the field, so that you have better command of the different technologies and the different materials. Again, for each people, and that again shows narration and connection to the resume. But this question comes up not that often, so don't worry too much about it. And then the last question, I just gave the example of what is your favorite book, but this can be just like frankly anything. What's your favorite movie? Like just like what's your favorite activity? What's your favorite hobby? They're usually, I would say, softball questions, simply because there's really no wrong answer, and they're kind of designed to get you to connect with the interviewer, to make sure that you're not as stressed, to make sure that you kind of get the feeling that this is like more like a friendly conversation rather than a strict interview. That being said, there is a good way to answer these questions, especially when you're talking about something like a book. So I would recommend, as some schools already do require it in their essay, well, not their essays, but in their application, that you identify a favorite film, song, movie, that you choose a favorite uh, favorites of stuff like that, to make sure that you have a good answer. Now, I would not recommend that you chose like either children's books or like really pop culture stuff. That's okay, I suppose, but it just for my case, For the book, I chose Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. It's a modern classic, and it is my favorite book because of how it plays with time, the concept of time. And when you're discussing, I'm going to call this an intellectual question. When you're discussing intellectual question, the last component that I discussed, making a connection with the interviewer, becomes the most important because you're trying to make sure that the interviewer realizes that you're not just like a good student and a good, humanitarian and a good researcher and a good entrepreneur from your resume, but that you're just like a good intellectual. You're just a good conversationist. You're just someone that people would be willing to grab a coffee with because colleges want people that are just interesting in general, that have good things to say about stuff, that are not just going to sit there and say nothing. And so you should, you shouldn't just say this is my favorite book because it's really fun to read. You should talk about why it's your favorite book, what that book meant to you when you read it, and you can even talk about the different experiences that you felt if you read it or watched it different times about how you felt each different times. And you again, it's narration is the key here. Even in such a seemingly simple question, you by narrating you show different components of yourself. If you have the time, you can even relate it to some of your other hobbies. Like let's say, if you really like philosophy, you can relate like a book to some philosophical concept. If your favorite book is 1984 or Animal Farm, right, or even Slaughterhouse-Five in my case, you can talk about the historical background. You can relate it, to history. So there are a lot of connections that you can make. So don't regard these questions as simple, even though they're usually easier to answer, simply because there's so much room for you to show who you are truly that it's very open ended, and it's what you do with those questions. So I gave you some, I think, 8 examples of questions. And again, as you know, there's going to be a lot of variation on these questions, but you guys are probably, throughout your interview session, you guys are going to see these questions probably in one shape or form. And I'm just going to go again a brief summary of the 5 components. So first, narrate everything. Every question can be narrated, and every question can be expanded. And you don't just give the straightforward answer, but also talk about your personal experience and how that relates to the question. Very related. Talk about your resume. Your resume is your starting point, and start narrating from your resume, and then connect it to your future, especially in the college. Spin things in a positive direction if you are talking about something negative or a shortcoming. Also, when you're talking about especially something concerning like a group and other people, talk about their perspectives, talk about what that probably meant to them and how you took their perspectives into account when you were acting on when you're acting when you were working on that issue. And lastly, make a connection with the interviewer, meaning try to have a stimulating intellectual conversation that sticks with them. So again, the entire goal of this is to make sure that out of all the students that interview, you're the one that sticks with the interviewer, that you're the most unique. Another important thing, after you're done with all your questions and you ask questions of yourself, again, that's a very important thing to do. Have some questions about the school that are more complex, about specific clubs, specific organizations, specific research institutions, etc. Get their contact information simply because you want to email them after the interview is over, probably the day of or like a day later, so that you're still fresh in their mind, and then it shows that you're grateful that they took the time to come there and interview you and consider you. Because even if you don't get in, that's going to be a good way to be respectful. So that is absolutely something you should do. And this concludes my general guide on the interview process for the one-on-one interviews. This is applicable to both, again, regular schools and BSMB schools, since both of them have the one-on-one interview component most of the time. If you guys have any questions, any comments, any specific interview questions that you guys have either seen or are wondering if you're going to see, please type them in the comments, and I will try to get back to you as soon as possible. And thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope this was helpful.